Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending this session. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. Well, I want to thank you all for joining this virtual town hall today. This is being put on by the DiabetesWise.org team at Stanford University. My name is Corey Hood, and I'm a psychologist and professor at Stanford. And it's our team that created DiabetesWise, and we also created this series to help people at this time in the COVID era with some different areas of support. All of the work that we've been doing with DiabetesWise and this town hall is funded by the Helmsley Charitable Trust. So I want to just quickly highlight, one of the things that we've noticed as we've been working with people on DiabetesWise.org, which is a free and unbranded resource to figure out which devices might be right for you. We've heard a lot in this COVID era about problems getting prescriptions, making appointments, being able to access all the diabetes care and devices that they want. And so we were hoping that as part of this series of webinars that we're doing, that we can help people find a few different resources for this. So each week we're going to do this on Wednesdays at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific. And so we're going to run this throughout the summer. Before we introduce who all is on the panel and all the yeah. Can you hear me?
Hi, Corey. This is Sierra. We can hear you. We did lose your audio, but we can still hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Your audio is back.
Okay. For everybody who has been on any Zoom meeting, they know that there's usually some kind of technological glitch. And I think this is like my 20th meeting this week, so I apologize for that. But I think, as I was saying, one of the things that we like to know about as we get these started is to know a little bit about who's in the audience. And so I'd first like to have, we're going to put up a poll question about who you are and why you're attending this so that we get a little bit of information about that. So if you could answer this, what's your relationship to diabetes? You have type 1, you have type 2, you care for someone living with diabetes, or you're a healthcare provider. Thanks everybody for responding so quickly. Just about everybody has responded. Okay, that's great. So you can see that there's probably about 2/3 of the audience has type 1 diabetes, and then we have some individuals with type 2, and then there's a mix of healthcare providers and people caring for people living with diabetes. So I want to first introduce the faces that you see as part of our Stanford team and the part of the DiabetesWise team. I want to have Monica Lanning and Sierra Nelms introduce themselves real quickly. Just say, if you want to say something, you can. If not, then we'll move on.
Hi, I'm Monica. Nice to see everyone.
Hi there, my name is Sierra Nelms. I'm the project manager for DiabetesWise, and I work really closely with Corey and Monica and several others in our team for a lot of the stuff that we're working on, and it's pretty exciting to have you all here.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you for all your hard work on this project. And then I want to introduce Austin first, who is attending with us today and is going to talk a little bit about some of his experiences with type 1 diabetes and social support. But Austin, do you want to just quickly say hello and introduce yourself? And it looks like maybe Austin froze. So we'll come back to Austin, but we're going to hear from him in 20 or 30 minutes as we move along, because Austin has a large following on Instagram at everyday_T1D, and so we're going to hear from him a little bit later about some of his experiences with social support and having diabetes. So thanks for being here, Austin.
Of course, thanks for having me.
And then for the first 20 or 30 minutes, we're going to interview and hear from Dr. Michelle Lichman, who's an assistant professor at the University of Utah in the College of Nursing. She's an advanced practice nurse and has a lot of experience working with people with diabetes more generally, and then also has done a lot of advocacy efforts around helping people with diabetes, but also thinking about insulin affordability and many other aspects that require a lot of advocacy. So we're really excited to have Dr. Lichman with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So tell us a little bit about what's your experience with seeing people with diabetes. Tell us a little bit about why you originally started in diabetes and why you're working in this field.
Sure. So I've been a nurse practitioner specializing always in diabetes for the past 14 years. And I kind of fell into diabetes. I was taking a wheel thrown pottery class during nurse practitioner school. And an endocrinologist and a diabetes nurse practitioner happened to also be in that class. And when I mentioned that I had a fear of being able to adequately manage diabetes as a nurse practitioner after graduation, they invited me to rotate with them. And I never looked back. I loved the experience, and immediately following got a job doing diabetes. So kind of a not your typical approach into getting into diabetes care.
Yeah, no, that's great there. Thanks for sharing that. I think that you hear a lot of different stories about how people come to the diabetes world, and so we're really happy that you're part of this community. So I mentioned that you work at the University of Utah, but tell us a little bit about your practice, the kind of clinic you have, the people that you see in the clinic. Just tell us a little bit about your clinic activities.
Sure. So I practice at the Utah Diabetes and Endocrinology Center, which is affiliated with the University of Utah. We're in Salt Lake City. And I spend a portion of my time just seeing patients face-to-face in direct care. And then I'm also the medical director of the Intensive Diabetes Education and Support Program, which is essentially a kind of a diabetes education shared medical appointment boot camp. And we provide that for both people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
And when we were thinking about some things that we wanted to ask you, we were always interested in what people like the most about working with people with diabetes. So, and we're not going to ask you what the worst part is, but what's your favorite part of doing the work that you do, working in diabetes? Tell us a little bit about what's your favorite parts of it.
The thing that I love is that when you see someone with a chronic condition, you get to know them. You get to see them on an ongoing basis. You develop a relationship. You get to know things about them, their work, their kids, their dogs, everything about them. And you really can't get that in an urgent or emergent care setting. I have always decided that I don't want to do Band-Aid care. I don't want to just, see someone fix them and then never see them again. I want to make sure that I'm in it for the long haul. And diabetes is something that allows for that.
And one thing that I just remembered I wanted to mention to all of the attendees is if as we're going along, if you have some questions for us at the DiabetesWise team or for Dr. Lichman or others, just put those in the chat box, and you can either do it to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. It's kind of nice for everybody to read those. So if you want to drop them into the chat box, that'd be great. Today's topic is really about social support and trying to get a sense of how people feel supported around having diabetes. So when you think about social support, how do you describe what social support is to the people that you work with diabetes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Social support to me means that you are getting something beyond those tasks that are part of diabetes, that makes making living with diabetes more manageable. For some, that's like having more information that helps them make diabetes decisions. For others, it's emotional support that they can receive that just helps them keep on going. And for others, it's like things that you can hold in your hand, like someone who helps to pick up a prescription for you, or somebody that actually creates a healthy meal that you like, or somebody who's willing to be your exercise buddy. So something that you can kind of hold. And there's different types of people who can fill those roles. So usually we think of family members first as being someone who can kind of support you in your diabetes. And I think that that's definitely true. There's different types of support that can happen with family members. In the research that I've done with Cindy Berg, one of the things that we have seen is just sometimes family members may be walking a line of what is nagging or controlling versus what's actually helpful and supportive. And so I think making sure that family members can understand that. And then I also think healthcare providers play some sort of role in social support to varying degrees, but they tend not to be really engaged in that day-to-day living with diabetes. It's more, I might be able to kind of help support you, maybe perhaps find a cheaper prescription, or perhaps find you some other informational resources. But the day-to-day, I don't know that sometimes healthcare providers aren't attuned to that piece. And so where my research has really targeted is peers. So those people who also have diabetes that can be really important in your life. And a lot of it is really that shared experience that you can share something that you've experienced and someone else has experienced that, and you kind of understand the tips and tricks of living with diabetes. And so that's where most of my work has really focused.
And that's great. And, we want to hear more about the peer work. And you hit on this a little bit, but why is getting social support so important for people with diabetes?
I think that it's easy to burn out with diabetes when you have so many tasks that are required of you daily, and there's so much mental energy that's going towards this one thing. It's nice to get that extra support. We know that diabetes distress can be common, and just because diabetes and just it's overwhelming, it can be so overwhelming. And so having other people who can be there to support you during that process in a condition that doesn't go away is really important.
And one of the questions, I think maybe Monica, now is a good time for that other poll question about where people get social support, and then we can maybe comment on that as we go along. So this poll question is going to be, I think that it's going to have you choose just one area that you find to be the most helpful in terms of getting your social support. And it's not popping up, Monica, but do you want us to, I can go back to asking, oh, there we go. Thank you. what's your favorite way to receive social support? And so you have to just pick one. So you can look at the options here: Facebook groups, other social media, virtual events, in-person gatherings, some group activity related to your religion. So tell us a little bit about what's your favorite way to get social support? So we'll give everybody a few more seconds to chime in. We probably should have had a just Zoom box on here for instead of virtual events, because that's so popular right now. All right, that's great. Thanks to everybody who voted. You can see here the results we have, and I think Dr. Litzman, you can see this, correct?
Yeah.
So maybe I'll ask you first. If do you have any comment on this? Do you think that this is pretty common? Do you have anything kind of jump out at you?
I think that everybody with diabetes, their personalities are different, and the way they manage diabetes is likely different. And so it makes sense that there are different types of support people need. And, not everybody is a social media person. And for those who are not focused in the online space, they would go to more in-person. And so it makes sense that there are lots of different ways that people would want to get social support. And just because not everybody's the same, we're not all robots.
And, and just like you said, there's, people get it in different ways. Have you noticed that it's different now in the COVID era? I mean, since, in many ways, lockdown started across many different states in March. And so we've had a pretty steady, period of time where we've had to alter the way that we reach out to people and connect. What have you noticed anything about people with diabetes and the way that they're getting social support now?
Absolutely. So I think for those people who really appreciated those in-person meetups, those have gone away for many people. And so people are now forced in this era of COVID, they're forced to do more virtual or more texting or phone-based, that could be FaceTime or something like this, like Zoom. But people are now forced to use more technology to get the social support they need. I think the other really important thing is those people who have been supporting us, they may be dealing with COVID in their own way. So maybe they have lost a job or they have distress in some other way. And so I think we've also seen that some people who, this person used to be my buddy or is my buddy, and I used to lean on them, but now they're going through so much with COVID. And so now I can't lean on them as much. And so now people are seeking new sources of social support because of the people that they leaned on aren't as available.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And hopefully through what we're doing today, that people will get some new ideas about, ways to stay connected. And there's some good conversation and good questions going on in the chat, and that's really helpful. We'll make sure that we get to those questions as we move along, but keep dropping those in there so we can keep an eye on it. I wanted to maybe go to Austin first for a minute, and maybe ask Austin if I think we can probably the video can be turned on, but I wanted to ask Austin if you could just tell us maybe quickly, about your diabetes experience, how long you've had diabetes, and then also how do you like to get social support around your diabetes, and what's been different now since COVID? And if you forget any of my 8 questions, then I'll remind you. But dive in with a little bit about your own diabetes.
Yeah, sure. So I was diagnosed when I was 2. I'm 25 now, so I've had it for just a little over 22 years. Oh, and my puppy is crying. 1 second.
I think that all of us can understand these different situations where across different Zoom meetings, I've had kids walk through, animals come through. So go ahead, Austin.
So I've had diabetes for a little over 22 years now, and so I've kind of lived through where MDI was a big thing, into the introduction of insulin pumps, And now we have CGMs and Dexcoms and all these tools that make diabetes so, I guess, less taxing to manage. But I grew up, when I was younger, my social support was a lot of camp. I went to diabetes camp for a long time. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and so I went to a camp called Camp Sweeney, which is in Gainesville, which is just north of Texas, or of Dallas. And there I was with kids my age, from the age of 6 to, I guess, 19, or whenever you graduate high school. And so I was with 135 other diabetics who were just doing life just like me. And so every year I looked forward to it because they knew exactly what you're going through, exactly what diabetes was and what a low blood sugar felt like and what high blood sugar felt like. And they knew exactly what you're going through. And so for the longest time, I think I attended for 14 years. And so that was my social support. And so like whenever I needed something, I could call any of the 300 other diabetics that I knew. But I know for a lot of other people, that's not the case. They don't have that place that they can go to, at least when you're younger. And so that's where I guess nowadays social media comes into place, where you can find anybody on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, and be able to reach out to them and ask questions and form relationships, whether they're virtual or personal. But so that's been really, really cool to see how the transition has come. What were your other questions? I don't know if I answered all of them.
No, I think you covered those. I think, and one of the things that you said there reminded me of a question I was going to ask Dr. Lichman, and then I'll come back to you in a minute to also answer this. But Dr. Lichman, people can get social support in person. It's a little bit different now in COVID, but also online. What's the kind of right mix for people of doing stuff face to face versus trying to connect with people on social media or online? And I know there's probably not an exactly right answer, but what do you think is the best mix for people online versus in person?
I think it depends on the individual. A lot of times people will need it temporarily for a short period of time, and then maybe they're feeling more satisfied with their diabetes, or they don't feel like they need as much support, and so then they back off, and then something will happen and maybe they come back. So I think that there's also this waxing and waning. So I don't know that there's like a specific number. I do think that there's probably an additive effect where if you meet someone online and then you have an opportunity to meet with them in person, it seems like that bond can even be stronger, or vice versa. You meet someone in person and then you continue that relationship online. So I do believe that there's some sort of additive effect there. The other thing I'll add is I think that just because two people have diabetes, it doesn't mean they're automatically going to be best friends. I think that there's usually something else that has to tie them together. So sometimes that's culture. So we're running a research study that is specifically for people who are Spanish speaking, Hispanic, with type 2 diabetes. And so because they have language that bonds them, but also this cultural aspect, we're really seeing some nice support in that study. But for others, it might be, we both have type 1 diabetes and we both love Star Wars. I mean, there's usually some other thing that bonds those people to really create a nice relationship.
Yeah, that's is a great point, and it goes back to what you had mentioned earlier on about peers and about finding peers that can be a network for you to provide some support. Austin, I was going to come back to you and ask, thinking of peers and the kind of support that you like, what are some things that, what are the kind of like peers with diabetes that you look for? Who are the people that do you feel, a way to connect with and feel that support? You mentioned the camp side, but, tell us a little bit about like the peers that are really helpful to you with diabetes.
So for me, so I get along with anyone who has diabetes, because I guess maybe not anyone, but 99% of the people that I meet with diabetes, I usually get along with. And a majority of the time is because when I'm telling a story of like even the other day, I was at the gym and my blood sugar dropped significantly. I started my workout at around 115, and in about half an hour, I was at 36. And so having a low and being able to tell that story, and someone was like, hey, like me too, like I understand that. That happened to me last week or last month. That having that connection, and that they understand what you're talking about. I mean, that's honestly all I look for in a peer. And I guess with when peer, I mean connection with diabetes. But in reality, that's not everything that is going to keep a connection or a friendship alive for a long period of time. That might be a point-to-point connection, but it's not going to elongate that. And so in order to elongate that relationship, I look for someone who is going to, they want a goal, and they want to reach that goal. And so in order to reach that goal, whether that be better their A1C, or better their workout or blood sugars during workouts, they're not going to reach that goal on their own. And so they need someone, and they need support in order to get there. So whether that be from their doctor, their medical practitioner, whoever it may be, they have to get there. And through, like for me, social media, I've found a way that when you reach out to people that are like, hey, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that, they have a goal and you have that same goal, you can help each other and increase, or I guess make that relationship better. And honestly, when I started like my journey on social media or whatever, I didn't set out to do like, I guess, be in the position I am today. I just wanted to be able to help other people with diabetes, and I thought maybe I could do that. And putting myself in the position of trying to help other people, it helped me make more friends who had goals, who wanted to improve their lives or their blood sugars or whatever. So I think one of the big things is wanting the goal of self-improvement, and trying to get your blood sugar or your life, rather than being controlled by diabetes, just, maneuvering your life around diabetes.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, Austin. And there were a couple things that I heard that I think are important, and I want to also ask Dr. Lichman to kind of reflect on that too. Certainly there's some way like that shared experience that either you talk about or don't have to talk about, that just that kind of common feeling that you have with people is really helpful to establish that relationship. And then it's important with social support to get the kind of support that you need, and it might be in your case that, and in others that are attending, thinking about how to have a shared goal, common endpoint that you're working for. Dr. Lichman, do you ever counsel the people that you work with on ways to get social support? What I mean by that is that maybe somebody just wants somebody to listen to them, and other people want them to solve the problem for them. But how do you kind of help direct people toward the right kind of social support for them?
Usually I ask about a time when somebody was helpful in their diabetes, so they can identify a person, and then what were like the aspects of that help. Was it like kind of more on the emotional support side or something different? And so usually when someone can identify how someone has helped them, usually I just ask, well, how can you get more of that? Is there a way to seek that out further? With regards to, if someone wants to someone to more listen or provide advice. I think sometimes framing the conversation that you're going to have with somebody, you know, I want to share something. Can you just listen versus, you know, can you, I'm looking for advice. So maybe just framing the conversation before it happens. I think sometimes we get unsolicited advice and it's, that's not welcome, but if we can frame the conversation ahead of time, sometimes that can guide things. And I also think just from like since we've been talking about the online peer support space, sometimes you can feel heard by reviewing historical posts from others. So when people are posting different things on social media, you feel validated in that, oh, other people are experiencing that too. So this idea of lurking is actually shown to be pretty beneficial. So in some ways you can feel heard just by seeing yourself in another person through those social media posts.
That's really great. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about, Dr. Lichman, before we open up to some of the questions in the chat, is have you noticed any changes in how people can access diabetes devices and technologies since COVID started? Or have you noticed any changes, anything with your practice or just what you're seeing from kind of an advocacy standpoint?
I think one of the most important things is to know whether or not your healthcare provider is working from home or if they're physically going in. So like, for example, my situation is that I go in once a week to do a wet signature. And so if you need something signed, it may be delayed just because your provider is not going in every single day. So that's potential one delay. Another delay is, especially with Medicare and Medicaid, they're asking for so much extra paperwork these days that sometimes just gathering all of that paperwork can also provide delays. And then another potential delay is, it sounds crazy, but our electronic medical record system, sometimes you send a prescription right to the place that it needs to go, but then they fax something back and then want you to handwrite the prescription all over again. And so there's sometimes delays with that process. Early on in March, I did have a couple of patients who reported some supply delays, that they were out, and it wasn't very long. It was just maybe they had to wait a couple weeks. It wasn't like months and months. I haven't seen that lately, but I did see that at the very beginning.
Okay, thanks. And really appreciate your thoughts on all the topics we've been discussing so far. So maybe I'll turn it over to Monica or Sierra to have, were there any questions that you picked up from the chat that you wanted to mention first?
Sure. Hi there, this is Sierra. So we do have a question here that says, what is a great way to ask doctors to assess people with diabetes distress? Social support is not always as much of each visit, especially virtual, as patients would like.
So maybe, Dr. Lichman, you have some ideas. So what's a great way to ask, you know, to kind of assess people for diabetes distress, because it's not always, you know, I think social support's kind of wrapped up into that, but not always talked about.
Sure. So I typically, because we can't ask, you know, do a diabetes distress scale at every visit, I usually just ask one question, and that's, what is the hardest part of having diabetes right now? And sometimes there's distress about insurance, and maybe I can help with, I'll do my best to try and help solve that. If it's that people are described that they're feeling burnt out, then we can go in that direction. But I think if you can identify what people perceive as the hardest thing for them, that's typically how I try to assess diabetes distress quickly in a visit.
And is that something that that pretty much every time you visit with somebody, you ask that? And my guess is that a lot of times people have an idea of what's the hardest, right? I mean, it's a pretty common thing for people to experience diabetes distress. And, yeah.
Absolutely. I try to make it routine with all of my visits. I especially ask it at every new appointment. And I think, you know, some people will say the hardest part is checking my glucose. And then sometimes that leads to a conversation about CGM. Sometimes some people will say the hardest is remembering to take my insulin or something like that. And so we can talk about alarms, although annoying, can be helpful in some people. So I think based on just asking that one question, you can get some great insight that can take you down different paths on how you might want to provide education or advice.
That's great. Sierra, what another question that came in?
Sure. So this next question reads, can you share a few pointers regarding how best to introduce the topic of social support and its values to patients who are struggling with their diabetes management and could benefit from non-HCP support?
I think that's a great question. So I think one thing to think through is some people, when you ask who is the most helpful to you and your diabetes, some people will say, no one. I do it all by myself. I don't rely on anybody. I'm independent. I don't need anybody. And so I think that sometimes in some situations, people don't realize some of the nuanced things that people are doing that can be helpful, especially in relationships that are partnered where you're living with somebody. Sometimes just simply having the spouse or the partner there in the diabetes education session can actually help them to better understand diabetes. And I'm not talking specifically about like diet and exercise, but in our program, we do a specific session on coping and how partners can help with that piece of it. Because I think that, if you understand the diet piece and you're helping to prepare meals, but you don't understand the coping piece, you're only halfway there. And so I think trying to see who else is in their life that could be maybe use some education themselves to better understand diabetes and the situation they're in.
Yeah, that's great. And I was going to kind of building off that, I was going to ask Austin quickly about, do you have some like go-to people for certain kinds of support? So say it's about medications or prescriptions, like you go to a certain person. If it's about like finding the buddy to work out with or to hold you accountable, do you go to a certain person? Have you found that you've got kind of your, certain person for each of those tasks?
Yeah, I wouldn't say certain person, but I've found a set of people that have common interests. So whether that be weight training or whether it be medication questions, or if I'm switching from the pump back to MDI, how am I going to adjust my dosing and long-acting insulin and all that fun stuff. I found a set of people who either have the credentials and the experience to assist me, or I know well enough to put my effort into. But with that said, it is always a great idea to ask a medical professional or your doctor, or like I'll text my endo if I have any questions, which is phenomenal. I know not everybody can do. My endo is I guess I have access enough to him to be able to shoot him any questions. Like I'm like, hey, I need a new prescription for Humalog. Can you get that for me? And then he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. But I have found that I have found groups of people that I can ask, or like I have a group of running diabetes that that's all they do. They just run long distance, and I'm not a runner. So I was actually getting into that when COVID first started, because I needed something to do with myself. And I was like, hey, so like I ran for the first time yesterday. I ran like a mile. My blood sugar dropped. At this point, what should I do? I'm like, hey, just carry some glucose tabs or eat a little bit more before you start. That should hold you over by the end of the run. And different things like that. So I have found that I have different sets of people, and different people that I even just follow that don't know exist, that have expertise in like traveling internationally and different things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. And wanted to go back to Sierra to see if there are some more questions coming in.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of them actually I think is really relevant to what we're talking about right now. And this is a question for you, Austin. I think given what you were just talking about, somebody who is curious what devices you are using.
Yeah, I am on the Dexcom G6 and the Tandem T-Slim X2, which is this insulin pump right here. And then this insulin pump is running the Control IQ software, which is a closed hybrid loop system. So what that means is that it talks to my Dexcom and it will, if my blood sugar is trending upwards, then it'll increase my basal insulin. And if it detects that I'm going to be dropping below 70, it'll decrease my basal or suspend my insulin until my blood sugar is back in range. They're great. I love them both.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I didn't know if kind of related to that, if Dr. Lichman, if you wanted to comment on anything, related to devices and, you've been in practice, I think you talked earlier about, 14 years ago or whatever the, the time was, but you were talking about, so you've seen quite a big shift in devices and technologies. And so I just wondered, like what are you excited about in terms of devices for people with diabetes? What are the things that, you think are going to happen for people with diabetes in, the coming years?
I think we're starting to see a slow shift to more people with type 2 diabetes having access to devices, which I think is fantastic. It's been a belief for so long that just people with type 1 diabetes and mostly children with type 1 diabetes have access to diabetes technology. And so I think that's starting to shift a little bit, especially in my practice. I think the other thing that's exciting is functions like the Control IQ, the closed hybrid loop system, I think is really helping smooth things out for people. So, when I talk to patients, you still have to count the carbs, you still have to bolus, but sometimes people do all of those things and something happens and the glucose still goes up or it goes down. And so having kind of a buffer to help with that, I think is really, really nice for people. I also think that, despite all the great things that are happening in technology, I'm very concerned about access just in general, because not everybody has access to this great technology that exists. You spoke earlier about insulin advocacy. People need to be able to have insulin, number one, if they are dependent upon it. But these tools are really, really great. But if people don't have access, they can't afford them, their insurance doesn't cover, or they don't have insurance, it's a real challenge to see how great things could be without having access to them if they want them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And for those of you who are attending, just when you look at the kind of at least in the US, the type 1 diabetes population, probably 50 to 60% of people are using an insulin pump, but it's more like 20 to 30% are using CGM. And those numbers are changing. But still, when you think about, there's still a large number of people in the US who can't access these type of devices that could offer a lot of benefit. And so I think it's, we do have a lot of work to do to increase access and increase awareness about it. And so I appreciate you mentioning that and bringing it up. I wanted to make sure that we're not missing any questions from the chat. Are there any other things that you saw, Sierra, that you wanted to ask?
Sure. So this question came a little bit earlier, actually. So do we see differences in, social support needs or social seeking behaviors in people with type 1 versus type 2?
That's a great question. Dr. Lichman, do you want to?
Yeah, I definitely can see some differences sometimes. So we're running a study right now. It's specifically Hispanic, Spanish-speaking people with type 2 diabetes not on insulin yet. And because they're not on insulin yet, those questions or support that they need don't revolve around insulin. A lot of it revolves around exercise, diet, different recipes, and also we had the interesting phenomenon of not only COVID hit, but Salt Lake had a gigantic earthquake, and several aftershocks. And so people could see what happened when they were stressed because of things that were happening. And one of the things that I saw with the social support that was happening is people they could understand more about what was going on with them through people who had experience with diabetes. So I think one of the things with type 1 versus type 2, sometimes there's different number of years of experience with diabetes. So someone could be 30 years old with type 1 and have 22 years of experience behind them, or they could be 30 years old with type 2 with only 1 or 2 years of experience of diabetes behind them. So there's some of this diabetes experience that I think kind of impacts some of the support, because those years of experience are really, really important. And also those years of experience in having good support yourself, in being able to find your way through how you're managing your diabetes, I think is important. But I do tend to see the type 2, especially if, well, I guess I'll share one of the studies we did looked at type 2 diabetes, and it was those who are not on any medications at all, and those who were on multiple daily injections of insulin or a pump that were seeking out the online support the most. So that tells me that people are coming on early in their diagnosis, and they're really trying to find ways to maybe what changes they need to do to see if they can avoid or delay medications. And then people who are further progressed in their disease, and so then seeking out the support. With type 1, I feel like people are coming no matter how long they've had their condition. So I've had patients who are weeks in that have already found a community that they can identify with. And I see people who are 50 years in that just got a social media account, and they're now kind of seeing things. So I think those kind of are some of the differences that I've seen.
Yeah, that's really great. And the only, and just for those attending, if you, some of the studies that Dr. Lichman has talked about, I think you can search for on Google, but we also may be able to post some of those to our website when we put this video up, because I think they're really important. One other thing I'll add is that around social support, sometimes it also is dependent on, from a cultural standpoint too, because it's, I mean, I think you were highlighting that for sure, Dr. Lichman, but sometimes the idea of what having diabetes means is different by culture. And so sometimes it can be, you know, really the case that someone is blamed very heavily for having it within a certain group, and others it's, you know, part of kind of integrated into life. And so I think as when you're seeking social support, I think it's also important to think about some of the, you know, you're within your community and within your network, and what are some ways you can do that. So I wanted to, we're gonna wrap up here in probably the next 5 or 10 minutes. But one of the questions that came in just recently was about how parents and caregivers can get social support. And I thought maybe I'd throw it to you, Austin, just to see if, you know, you talked a lot about camp, and so you were probably around a lot of other kids, a lot of other parents and caregivers who were trying, but maybe, you know, what do you see as ways that parents and caregivers can get some support for, you know, when they have kids with diabetes?
So obviously pre-COVID, there are a lot of, at least in my area, I got emails, way too many emails about like T1D parent together, and like where they could just like hang out, their kids could do their own thing, and they could just kind of talk and ask questions and get advice and different things like that. And again, social media is a huge tool. I know there are thousands of Facebook groups. There tomorrow, or not tomorrow, on the 18th, there's a conference called Friends for Life. And it's all like anybody can go, all diabetes virtual, but there's a type 1 diabetes parents session in that. And so there are thousands of groups and resources about type 1 diabetes and parenting that you can find. You can probably just Google it and find thousands of them. But there are resources out there, and you can even, talk to your doctor, and they probably can refer you to someone who has experienced it. I wouldn't be here without my mom, obviously, and she and my dad took care of my diabetes and made me very independent from day one of having it. I started drawing my own shots when I was 4 and giving myself injections when I was 5. So without them, I probably wouldn't be doing what I do today. And so having a support group where they learn from, and I guess am the result of that. And so it's very important, and honestly, you can find it anywhere, especially nowadays with social media. You just have to look for it.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. And I wanted to go back to Dr. Lichman and ask, if a person with diabetes is in a visit with you and they say, hey, what are the best places to go to get some resources on social media? Are there some like go-to places that you recommend people check out first?
Yeah, so I think it depends if they have type 1 or type 2 and kind of what their needs are. I do try to gear them towards something they're interested in. So like Austin spoke about weightlifting and running. So if I know a resource of specifically related to that, I'll kind of gear them in that direction. But if it's just kind of a general support, I've been recommending Beyond Type 1 and Beyond Type 2, both in English and in Spanish. I think that that's kind of a nice place to get a lot of general information, but also dive down into some social support. The other thing is, because I'm in Utah, we have a local Utah T1D group. And so I recommend that as well for people, just because it's more on a local level. They can meet in person if they decided that they wanted to, and they kind of have a pulse on the local issues like advocacy and that type of thing.
Great. One of the questions that just came in that I think would be good for us to talk about briefly as we're wrapping up, but there was a question about fear of COVID, and I think we're all a little bit nervous about it, but what have you heard from people with diabetes in terms of, does it seem like they have more worries and more fears about it versus just kind of the general people that you're working with?
I have seen quite a bit of fear from different types of patients, but I've also seen no fear as well. So I think I've seen a spectrum. The people who tend to be less fearful tend to be younger. And I think that we've seen that in the general population. But I have had some people not leave their apartment at all. And so we worry about, their social support needs, but also, access to physical activity and exercise and the things that keep us well. And so we definitely have seen some fear. I think that a lot of people are using, they're accessing mental health resources more these days. It almost seems like it's become more normal to access that, where I think before people felt like it was kind of a stigmatized thing, but as people are talking about this more in the news, the support that they need because they're anxious or they're depressed related to COVID and their situation, I think that people are accessing more support in that way.
I think that's a really important point, and I for all of those attending and for those working with people with diabetes to reach out to them and make sure that they feel supported and have everything they need, and then also to normalize it, that I think we're all a little bit fearful at this time, and it's good to talk to others about it and find ways to feel supported. So I think that we're going to wrap up now. I think a couple of housekeeping things I want to note: in the chat, there is a link to a quick survey about this session, about how it went, and then you can provide your email address if you'd like, so that we can send you our newsletter, which has a little bit of a review of this, but also information about DiabetesWise, which is free, and also some of our upcoming webinars. And if there are any other topics that you'd like us to think about, we'd certainly love to hear that. And then I want to thank Austin for joining, and you may want to follow him on Instagram at everyday_T1D. Really appreciate your time, Austin, and your perspective, and spending time with us, and the real experience of having diabetes. We really appreciate it. And then also I want to note Monica and Sierra, all of their help making sure that this went well, and then Dr. Lichman for sharing your expertise with us. And the last thing I'll say is that this will be up on the website. And if you have any colleagues or any other people with diabetes you want to share it with, the video should be up pretty soon. So thank you all. Thanks for your time today.